Hey, what's going on? What's happening? Peace and power, elevation be to all of you. This your girl Tiffany coming through here live in effect. So today's topic, I want to get into talking about the spiritual church movement, and the founders were the leaders actually. One is the founder, the other one is the leader. And that is Mother Leafy Anderson and Catherine Seals. Right. So what's very interesting about these two is that these women um, had their own organization movement out in New Orleans, Louisiana. Now, New Orleans is known for a lot of spiritual practice, okay? A lot of African customs and also Native American customs, right? So if you guys go to the Mardi Gras and the second line dance they have and all these different events they got going on, they very spiritual. All right. They practice a lot of African customs out in New Orleans. I mean, you come across a lot of voodoo practice, a lot of mixture of voodoo and Christianity and various things. Okay. So hoodoo practice as well. You'll find a lot of that in New Orleans. So New Orleans is a very interesting place. Okay. But I want to share this information. Make sure you guys like and subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. So before I go into talking about Mother Leithy Anderson and Catherine Seals, let's talk about what is the spiritual church movement and where did it come from as far as like how did it come about. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to share some information. Okay. I want to share some information, deal with spiritual movement and spiritualism. All right. Now let's go ahead and start on the spiritual church movement. So right up here, here's the information on spiritual church movement. So the spiritual church movement is an informal name for a group of loosely allied and also independent spiritual churches and spiritualist denomination that have in common that they have been historically based in the African American community. All right. So it does talk a little bit about Leafy Anderson. All right. So many of them owe their origin to the evangelical work of Leafy Anderson, a black religious leader of the early 20th century who was born in Wisconsin. So I'm going to get back to her later. All right. But she founded the Eternal Life Christian Spiritualist Association in 1913. Anyhow, go down further. It says, although the churches founded by Anderson are often associated with New Orleans, the spiritual church movement has always been national in scope. It spread quickly throughout America during the 1920s. And one impetus for its diffusion was that in 1922, the National Spiritualist Association of Churches expelled or made unwelcome of all its black members. All right. So it goes on to say this led to the formation of a national group called the Color Spiritualist Association of Churches, and within a few years, there were black spiritualist churches in Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, and many other cities. So during the decade preceding World War II, the spiritual churches of New York City were well documented in print and film. All right, so at the present time, the spiritual church movement encompasses primary churches which are influenced by Protestant Christian worship style, especially Baptist and Pentecostal praise music, as well as churches that contain a great deal of Catholic imagery, including the veneration of saints. All right. So as you can see, it also go down and say it is common usage to distinguish spiritual church movement churches from other, often less explicitly Christian spiritualist churches by the use of the name spiritual rather than spiritualist in their titles. This naming convention is found in mid-20th century books such as How to Conduct a Candlelight Service by Mikhail Strabo and Reverend Adele Clement of Divine Harmony Spiritual Church. It is also notable in the name of Christian spiritualist denomination within the spiritual church movement, such as the Metropolitan Spiritual Churches of Christ, founded in 1925, Pentecostal Spiritual Assemblies of Church Worldwide, founded in 1938, whose motto is Pentecostal by birth, spiritual by lifestyle, apostolic by experience, and Christian by demand, a spiritual church on a spiritual foundation walking in the supernatural. And then you got the Mount Zion Spiritual Temple, founded by King Louis H. Narsasi in Oakland, California in 1945, and the allied churches he founded and led in Detroit, Michigan, Sacramento, California, Bakersfield, California, and Houston, Texas. So, and then you also have Universal Hagar's Spiritual Church, founded in the 1920s, which also operates the Hagar School of Mediumship and Psychology. All right, so right here, pretty much, it shows that it came up out of the independent schools of spiritualist churches and spiritualists. Now, I wanted to share a little bit of information about spiritualism real fast, okay? Because it kind of ties into all of this. Now, it may seem very confusing. It may seem very confusing, which it is. It can be very confusing, but it pretty much ties to all this information here. So now let's go into spiritualism, and then we're going to look at the spiritualist churches, right? Well, no, we're going to look at spiritualism and spiritualism. So now let's look in spiritualism. What is that? So right under here, spiritualism. So spiritualism is a spiritualist, religious, and philosophical doctrine established in France in 1850 by the French teacher, educational writer, and translator Hippolyte Léon Desar Revel. Right, he wrote books on the nature, origin, and destiny of spirits and their relation with the corporeal world under Alan Kardec. Right, Kardec's work result from studying mediumistic phenomena, which he initially believed fraudulent, while questioning several mediums while they were in a trance state on a various matters. He compiled, compared, and synthesized the answers obtained from the spirits into a body of knowledge known as codification. It speaks of the constant need to investigate the world around us, to make sense of our findings, which is dealing with philosophy, and to apply them to our day-to-day living to improve ourselves and the world around us, religion. So this approach is often called the triple aspect of spiritualism, the conjoining of science, philosophy, and religion. All right. So spiritualist philosophy postulates that humans and all other living beings are immortal spirits that temporarily inhabit physical bodies for several necessary incarnations to attain moral and intellectual improvement. It also asserts that disembodiment spirits may have a benefit or malevolent influence on the physical world through passive or active mediumship. Spiritualism also embraced the concept of deistic evolution. It says the term first appeared in Kardec's book, The Spirit Books, which sought to distinguish spiritism from spiritualism. Now, again, so pretty much to sum that up, it's almost like the New Thought movement, in my opinion, because the New Thought movement pretty much deals with seeing yourself from a spiritual standpoint as opposed to dealing with the physical. Now, let's look at what is spiritualism, right? Let's look at spiritualism real fast. So we can pretty much get a better understanding. So right under here, spiritualism is the metaphysical school of thought opposing physicalism, and it's also the category of all spiritual beliefs and views from ancient to modern. In the long 19th century, spiritualism became most known as social religious movement according to which an individual's awareness persists after death and may be contacted by the living. Okay. So the afterlife or the spiritual world is seen by spiritualists not as a static place, but as one in which spirits continue to evolve. These two believe that contact with spirits is possible and that spirits are more advanced than human, led spiritualists to the belief that spirits are capable of providing useful insight regarding moral and ethical issues, as well as about the nature of God. Some spiritualists will speak on a concept which they refer to as spirit guides, and specific spirits often contact who are relied upon for spiritual guidance. So Emmanuel Swedenborg has some claims to be the father of spiritualism. Spiritualism, a branch of spiritualism developed by Alan Kardec and today practiced mostly by continental European and Latin America, especially in Brazil, emphasizes reincarnation. All right. So now spiritualism basically saying that you can have a contact with the dead and you able to have a contact with them spiritually so they can give you some type of moral advice. It's kind of like dealing with, in a way, it's kind of like venerating the ancestors. Basically, you're venerating the ancestors, so you having contact with their spirits. Now it may sound spooky, okay, it may sound pseudo to you individuals out there, but that's just their way of connecting. So it's their way of venerating as opposed to worshiping the ancestors. They're connecting with them through their spirit, by getting involved in doing like dances, rituals, and things like that. So it's like their way of contacting with the ancestors. Like when we look at Egungun Fest, for some of you that may not know about the Egungun, I did the video on that a while back. So the Egungun Fest is basically the celebration of the ancestors. All right. So you will have somebody that dress up in a costume and they'll come out and they portray like this type of, I don't want to say monster, but this type of character, right? Normally it's a male, but he dressed up in a costume and it's like you basically, share your grievance, right? But the way you do it is the fact that you pretty much pay homage to your loved ones that passes away. And it's like with him, the spirit of your ancestors operate through him. So he's dancing, he's moving around, and he's making all the noise and things like that. Okay. So I would say that the Gungun Fest will be some form of spiritualism or spiritualism in a way. It will be some form of spiritualism. All right. But now get into the actual subject in itself. Let's look up who is Leithy Anderson. Let's look up Leithy Anderson. So right here, there is no birth record for Leithy Anderson, but her obituary says she was born in 1887 in Balboa, Wisconsin, a town that never existed. Where she was born, she eventually moved to Louisiana and married William Anderson in Raceland. That marriage did not last. Anderson left her husband and moved to Chicago in 1914 before relocating to New Orleans in 1918. Spiritualist movement spread quickly throughout America during the 1920s. Because of segregation laws in 1922, the National Spiritualist Association of Churches expelled its black members. This led to the formation of the Colored Spiritualist Association of Churches. Within a few years, there were black spiritualist churches located in Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, and many other cities. So most churches in 1920 were led by male pastors. Anderson broke that mold. She founded the spiritualist movement in New Orleans. Her church included the use of spirit guides in worship service, along with a mixture of Protestant and Catholic practices. Anderson trained other women to assume leadership roles as the movement spread across the city. She invited jazz bands to play in her church when many black ministers denounced it as the devil's music. New Orleans leader later dropped the It is from their name and called themselves spiritual, putting a great emphasis on Jesus. All right. Anderson taught followers to summon spirits, offering classes for $1 a session. She was known for her yellow and gold robe draped with a mantle bearing the image of Black Hawk, her spirit guide. She told her followers that she had found the spirit of Black Hawk and in the historical Native American in Chicago. She considered him a protective figure and guardian who united the belief of Christianity with the ancient idea of a spiritual cosmology. All right, so she died of a flu in 1927. Her last words reportedly were, "I am going away, I am coming back, but you shall know that I am here." After her death, Anderson's successor, Mary Mother Catherine Seals, ran the Temple of the Innocent Blood Church. When Seals died, the church broke apart, giving rise to many spiritualist denominations in New Orleans and elsewhere. All right. All right, so now let's look up who was the Black Hawk. Okay. So let's look up who the Black Hawk was. Now, according to the biography, she's from Wisconsin, okay? And so she found inspiration in Black Hawk. So let's look up the information about who was Black Hawk, and then we're going to go on to the next thing. So Black Hawk, Sauk leader, right? He was a American Indian tribal leader from 1767 to 1838, okay? So Black Hawk was born Makatami Shakaka, right? And he was born 1767, October the 3rd, and he died October 3rd, 1838. He was a Sauk leader and warrior who lived in what is now the Midwestern United States. Although he had inherited important historic sacred bundle from his father, he was not a hereditary civil chief. Black Hawk earned his status as a war chief or captain by his action, leading raiding and war parties as a young man, and then a band of Sauk warriors during the Black Hawk War of 1832. All right, so it goes on to say that during the War of 1812, Black Hawk fought on the side of the British against the U.S. in hope of pushing white American settlers away from Sauk territory. Later, he led a band of Sauk and Fox warriors known as the British Band against white settlers in Illinois and present-day Wisconsin during the 1832 Black Hawk War. After the war, he was captured by U.S. forces and taken to the eastern U.S., where he and other war leaders were taken on a tour of several cities. So shortly before being released from custody, Black Hawk told his story to an interpreter, aided also by a newspaper reporter. He published autobiography of Makata Mi Shikaka, or Black Hawk, embracing the tradition of his nation in 1833. So the first Native American autobiography to be published in the U.S., his book became an immediate bestseller and has gone through several editions. Black Hawk died in 1838 at the age of 70 or 71 in what is now southeastern Iowa. He has been honored by an enduring legacy, his books, many eponyms, and other tributes. All right, so this is where she got her inspiration from. All right, so she was inspired by Black Hawk. Okay. And so Black Hawk brought so much inspiration based on his spiritual practice. Okay. So she combined that with her practice in the spiritual movement. So she felt the spirit of Black Hawk because he represents a warrior class from the Sauk warriors, which was located in where what is now known as the Midwest of the United States, which is Wisconsin. Okay. So that's where the concept of Black Hawk came from, because He was an actual leader, all right, of the Sauk tribe, and he was a warrior and he was a spiritualist, and that brought inspiration to her, to Leithy Anderson. So now, as a matter of fact, let's go ahead, and I got some books over here. I got one book which is called The Spirit of Black Hawk by Jason Berry, The Mystery of Africans and Indian. Okay, so you can go on here on archive.org and look more into this. Uh, so you can go right here on archive.org and you can check this out for yourself. So down here, The Spirit of Black Hawk. All right, A Mystery of Africans and Indian by Jason Berry. Let's look at the introduction. So it says, God is a spirit, and that they worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. John 4:24. All right, so here is, it talks about the movement of the spirit, and it talks about the world of Leafy Anderson. So let's look at the movement of the spirit. Acknowledgement, blah, blah, blah. All right, so here's the picture. Reverend Jewel Anderson holding Black Hawk service, photographed by Michael P. Smith in 1980. Okay. All right. So here's the introduction from the author. So the author basically said, my first encounter with the spirit of Black Hawk came on the Friday night before Mardi Gras in 1979. Although I had visited other spiritual churches in New Orleans, nothing foreshadowed the sheer drama of that night, the felt presence of such an overly otherworldly force. It was a muggy February evening with a warmth that made winter feel like summer. Webs of mist shrouded the city as I left the French Quarter following the St. Claude Avenue, crossed the Industrial Canal Bridge, and headed into a threadbare black neighborhood of the Lower Ninth Ward. All right, so it says, I was in the research stage of a television documentary about families of jazz musicians. The patriarch of one clan, a deacon in the spiritual churches, told me of a ceremony invoking the spirit of Black Hawk, a deceased Indian leader. Black Hawk had a little direct connection to my project, but curiosity hath its currents. Okay. So it says, the mist had turned to rain when I reached the church, a small cement block building with the exterior structure of a former laundromat. Only a dozen people were inside. Most were women. The interior resembled innumerable African American chapels and churches in this or any southern city. Framed picture of Jesus, candle on a modest altar, an old creaky piano, but with one major difference. In front of the altar stood a teepee made of thin stakes with incense burning at its base. All right. So I introduced myself to the bishop, who had been expecting me, and after an exchange of amenities, sat down in a rear pew. After opening prayers and a cappella hymn punctuated by tambourines bursting from a woman sitting near the altar, the bishop delivered a brief offertory. And so he said to the small flock, we welcome tonight our Black Hawk celebrator. The man who would be a Black Hawk wore a flowing white gown. He was about 23, with olive brown skin, dark hair, and eyebrows and dark piercing eyes. His name, I later learned, was Jewel Anderson, but that night, as far as I was concerned, he was Black Hawk. All right, so we come tonight to speak of a great warrior, he began. The great chief Black Hawk, and all of us know how Black Hawk will come to our aid. He will help you, he will fight your battles if you just be still. A bolt of thunder struck the sky, and the tiny chapel absorbed the current. Thunder hit again, rain started pouring the roof like cannonballs. Out went the lights. I was the only white there that night, and with heavy rain shaking the church now engulfed in darkness, I felt an eerie sensation as if sudden pull of the young preacher's word and his loose, limited, was it gesticulations were somehow certifying the presence of a higher power. All right, so here it is. The author basically give his own account, right? He happened to be a white man. He said when he came in there, he came to New Orleans, or he was in New Orleans for something different. It was a documentary about the Ninth Ward, but he did not expect to come into the church where they were practicing spiritualism and invoking the concept of Black Hawk. All right, so now let's go down to the world of Leithy Anderson. So that's on page 55. Okay, so hey, what's going on, Sister Jolanda? I hope everything going well with you. I hope everything going well. All right. Anyhow, so while I'm waiting for the page to load up, oh shoot, oh that's why. Hold on. So I'm waiting for the page to load up real fast. But anyways, like I mentioned before, New Orleans is they're like very in tune with spirituality. They very vibrant people. So the people that I met, right, and the people I came across, they are so vibrant and very spiritual. And you can tell when they talk with pride. They really do. They talk with pride. They talk with joy. If you ask them, hey, where you from? And they say, well, I'm from New Orleans. They talk with that pride in them. You know what I'm saying? And you could just hear the spiritual in them. Now, some of them do not really connect with their African roots very well. Some of them will say they Creole, but they don't even deal with the identity of being African. Okay? Like Kevin Gates. Because he's originally from New Orleans, but he grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And you'll see somebody like him claiming to be Native American and all that, this, that, and the other, right? But he doesn't identify himself as being a Louisiana Creole man, which he has a lot of African in him more than he got Native American in him. But, you know, that's how some of them are. You know what I'm saying? But anyways, okay, now let's go down to Leithy Anderson. The world Leithy Anderson. So that's a picture of Leithy Anderson. I'm trying to scroll that back a little bit. Zoom that back. All right, so this is Leithy Anderson, Mother Leithy Anderson right here. The founder of New Orleans Spiritual Churches. Okay. All right, so let's go down to where it says in 1918, at age 31, she left Chicago for New Orleans. Not much is known about her husband while she moved her ministry to New Orleans. Why does ministry means here? She began holding services out of a small house on Melpomene Street in Central City, a neighborhood now overshadowed by a housing project. She soon arranges to rent spaces about 2 miles away in the Longshoremen's Hall on Jackson Avenue, just down the Mississippi wharves, and began drawing crowds of 500 people, including many whites, to her services on Sunday, Monday, and Thursday nights. So key material on Mother Anderson come from interviews done in Depression by the Federal Writers Project. The field reporters tried to capture folk dialect without the benefit of taking recording. It was there in the Longshoremen's Hall that people saw Mother Anderson do some great work, said Mother Dora Tyson, one of her disciples, in an interview with Robert McKinney, himself a black. in 1939, 19 years later, and 12 years after Mother Anderson's death. And Longshoreman Hall explained Mother Doris, she had to work because you know how these people in New Orleans is. They think everything is fake. Well, Mother Anderson make them think different. She started to curing the sick and telling the doctors what was what, and they soon opened their eyes and started following Mother. Yes, sir. That woman used to take in so much money she didn't know what to do with it. I seen her with so much as $500 on a Sunday morning. She believed in charging. She said the spirit couldn't work for nothing and that she didn't fool with the kin of spirit. Her spirit was expensive spirit. Now, back in those days, she would have been considered as being a scammer, right? Because the way the information is broken down, how she was charging people, it was expensive to conjugate spirits, right? So she'll be considered as a scammer, and be considered as a pseudo in modern times. Okay. But back in those days, you know, again, she was running a movement. And not only she was running a movement, she was running a business. You know, so it's no telling how other people felt about her, but this is the account from one of the members of her movement and what they witnessed. All right. But in our modern time period, we look at that like, okay, if you charging extra money to do spiritual practices on people, yeah, it's kind of a red flag now. But anyways, let's go further down. It says she wore a robe, a yellow and gold opal drape with a mantelet bearing the image of Black Hawk, and three bracelets on her left arm that tended to slide off when she lit the furnaces on cold nights before services. She had a diamond ring said to be worth $250, no small sum back then, and on the street she was given to loud dresses and fancy made shoes. On Friday night, she held classes downtown at a place called Cooperative Hall, charging $1 per person with approximately 80 people per night. She taught her students how to prophesy, heal, pray, and see spirits, wrote McKinney, registering his skepticism about prophecy with quotation marks. They were instructed in how to read the Bible occasionally, he notes, the word occasionally hanging like a smirk. All right, so it says, of the 10 reverends listed as her leading students, 2 were white. From this group emerged several dynamic figures who created spiritual churches in large buildings and storefront chapels as the belief system took hold during the Depression periods. So in 1920, Mother Anderson purchased a 3-story clapboard building at 2719 Amelia Street, a mile or so uptown, still in Central City, a neighborhood pocket with privacy. The entrance door, with its circular arch, was framed by a pair of windows with oval-shaped arches. The fence rooftop, where she arranged potted flowers, gave a vista of Magnolia and Amelia Streets with their peeling duplexes and shotgun cottages and a constellation of lights spread out below. Today, the Amelia building is a Baptist church. The old roof has been replaced. The upstairs deck is gone. All right, so the reach of Leithy's life clearly found its grasp when she moved into her new church. Picture her on the roof deck, gazing at the stars, how consoling and how empowering to one who had struggled as she had. She called it Eternal Life Christian Spiritualism Church number 12, signifying a branch of the church that had been her focus in Chicago in 1914 and for several years before she moved to the South. All right. So then it goes on to talk about Mohawk. Hold on. In the early 1970s, another of her key protege, Bishop Bessie Johnson, told photo historian Michael P. Smith that Leif Anderson was half Mohawk. Mohawk ancestry is an attractive notion in light of the Black Hawk ritual she planted in the folkways of the Crestland city, but given the dearth of documentation about her life, deciding what to believe about Leithy Anderson carries implicit risk. In many ways, she is an enigma, an actress on the stage of history who retreated the wings, eludes those seeking knowledge of her truest self. She died unexpectedly, leaving little family and few papers. So was Leafy her birth name or one she took in the possession of creating herself? The maiden name of on succession paper of her estate is Williams. Yet even that name is questionable, and when she married it's unclear. The power of her personality suggests that she remolded herself after a troubled marriage. And it goes on to say the career of Leithy Anderson is a folk drama with the odyssey of her life pulling Black Hawk spirit southward. In the track of her years, the Indian memory inextricably overtakes that of the seated carrier, Mother Anderson. The riddle of Leafy life flickers through Black Hawk's spirit story like a leitmotif or leitmotif, a shadow figure of the mighty warrior, his feminine other, and a woman of mystery. Wow. So the life of Mrs. Leithy Anderson, moral and immoral, in three parts: the woman and the medium and the mother. Okay. The singer of Miss A. Price Bennett captivated the audience. Read a brief accounts in the Louisiana Weekly, the city's oldest African American paper. The play opened with a night scene in Chicago. Then the home life of Mrs. Anderson was shown, her call to spiritualism, and her works. Mrs. Anderson played the leading role. All right, so again, this book is very intriguing and very historical. So I think if you guys want to learn more about the spiritualism and the Black Hawk and the story about Leafy Anderson, please check out the book called The Spirit of Black Hawk by Jason Perry. And you can borrow on archive.org, which is the online library. Okay, it's pretty much just an online library where you can borrow books for 2 weeks or for an hour, however long you need it. Okay. All right, so that's that story. Now let's get into how Catherine Seals come into existence. Now let's talk about Catherine Seals. Okay. And then I have some more articles here. All right. All right. So now I'm about to get into who Mother Catherine Seal is. All right. Let me go ahead and pull up this window. All righty now. All right. So Mother Catherine Seals, as you can see, this come from New Orleans Historical.org. Okay. And down here, it says Mother Catherine Seal is a mysterious figure. There's not much written about her, only a few photographs of her existence. So a lot of what we do know about this spiritual mother is hearsay. And some that once she created her Bethlehem in the lower ninth ward, she never left. So this Bethlehem was the church in Menger where Mother Catherine ministered to thousands of people, black and white, during the height of the Jim Crow in the 1920s. She started her own temple, the Temple of the Innocent Blood, after a white spiritual healer turned her away for being black. After that, she was visited by a spirit that told her to create her own organization. This experience led to Mother Leafy Anderson, the founder of the spiritual church movement in New Orleans. Anderson trained her to be a spiritual mother so she could follow her calling and start her own independent church. There were a lot of small spiritual churches in the Ninth Ward at the time, usually run out of people's homes. Most of these rituals were kept behind closed doors. Since spiritual practices trace back to African tradition, many white people associate these religions with voodoo. To them, voodoo meant black. It meant backward. It meant dangerous. That's why Mother Catherine Seals looked to the outskirts of the town to build her compound across the industrial canal, where there was still no electricity of paved roads. She bought what now an entire block of Charbonnet, was it Charbonnet or Charbonnet? Charbonnet, if I'm saying it right, Charbonnet Street in the lower Ninth Ward, built a 10-foot wall around her property and got to work. All right. So Mother Catherine was also known for her healing powers. She used simple ingredients like castor oil and Epsom salt to ward off or expunge disease. There are also descriptions of people having wounds healed through chickens that were tied onto their legs. As word got around about Mother Catherine, more people trudged through knee-deep mud to visit her temple, which brings us back to the name, the Temple of the Innocent Blood. Mother Catherine related to women who were abandoned and abused by men, so she decided to service these women first and foremost. But she also vowed to not turn anyone away, no matter their age, gender, or race. This is how the Temple of Innocent Blood flattened racial hierarchy, which caused backlash, including regular arson attacks on the compound. People were not happy about an integrated healing space in Jim Crow New Orleans. So it goes on to say, so why did white people go to a temple? Well, let's say you didn't have money to see a doctor, or you did see a doctor who said there was nothing he or she could do. And then you heard there was a healer down the Lord Nine, down the Lord Ninth who was curing tuberculosis. You went. So Mother Catherine Seal led the Temple of the Innocent Blood from 1922 until her death in 1930. Her jazz funeral was one of the largest in the city history, with thousands of people in the streets. And right up in the Time magazine, Mother Rita was second in command to Mother Catherine and kept the temple alive for another few years. Ultimately, it couldn't survive without her, but her success inspired a larger spiritual church movement, and those churches kept a picture of Mother Catherine on their altar. In some ways, she's the Lord Ninth's patron saint. Oh, and as you can see there, they got that picture of her smudging that sage, boy. Let me tell you about that sage. They got a picture of her smudging. That sage is something else that's very important, because sage is supposed to help clear negative energy. All right. All right. So I have some article here. So I'm gonna go over these articles, and then I'm gonna show some more books, and then I'm about to just call it a quiz. Okay. All right. So let's see what the article got to say about Leithy Anderson. So basically, Mother Catherine Seals was the student of Mother Leafy Anderson. All right, so this article here is called "The Practices of the Spirits, Mother Leaf Anderson and the Black Spiritual Churches of New Orleans" by Yvonne Patricia Chereau. Okay, and this came out in 1998 from Swarthmore College, Religion Faculty Works. All right, so this is chapter 16. Mm, All right, so right here it talk about the beginning of spiritual movement coincide with the rise of African American religions in northern cities shortly after the turn of the 19th century. One of the earliest spiritual churches, the Eternal Life Spiritualist Church, was established in Chicago by Mother Leaf Anderson in 1913. Chicago, the archetypal black metropolis, was a verifiable mecca for thousands of blacks who departed the South between 1914 and 1918 and between 1939 and 1945 during what was known as the Great Migration. Fleeing poverty, labor exploitation, a devastating agricultural economy, and political and social repression, masses of black Southerners poured into the cities to fill a demand for cheap labor by northern industries seeking promising futures and economic opportunity. Concurrent with the rising tide of migration, an increasingly pluralistic religious situation developed in Chicago's African American neighborhoods. So in Chicago, blacks founded and joined Baptist and Methodist denominations, storefront holiness congregation, Muslim temples, Afro-Judaic sect, and numerous missionary organizations within this religiously diverse and rapidly growing population. The first black spiritual churches appeared in the same decade as the founding of Leaf Anderson Church. Several spiritual congregations emerged in other parts of the country. Scholars have noted the presence of spiritual storefront in several metropolitan areas in the United States early in the 1900s, but it is not clear whether these churches were related to one another. So in New Orleans, however, spiritual churches developed an independent and culturally distinct character spreading via a chain of congregation throughout that city's black and poor ethnic communities. All right. So it talks about her moving to New Orleans before the third decade of the 20th century, possibly 1919. Before her arrival, it is believed that she had organized churches in St. Louis, New Jersey, and Indiana. So the establishment of those mission churches was essential to the early growth of the movement. 11 congregations grew out of Anderson's original Eternal Life Spiritualist Church, including churches in Chicago, Memphis, Little Rock, and Pensacola. Yet, of all the cities where black spiritualism flourished, New Orleans became the integral center for the movement, with at least 175 churches established there over 50 years following Anderson's initial appearance. Damn. Is it possible to create only a sketchy portrait of Leif Anderson's life before 1918? All right. So, again, talk about where she was born. Okay. Um, it says she has traveled to numerous locations before settling in New Orleans as a site of her spiritual headquarters. And said she is listed in Chicago city directories for 1914, 1916, 1917 as a residing in the Southside Ward, where she operated a lunch counter. Only a few other historical facts have been uncovered regarding Anderson's background before arriving in New Orleans, when she began to attract a following among black and white residents of the city. Okay, so it goes on to say that the black spiritual churches provide institutional support for women in their pursuit of meaningful careers as preacher and pastor, and in private settings as readers and spiritual advisors. Spiritual ministers offer services as healing, counseling, and guidance on secular and religious matters for church members and non-church members alike. So these extra ecclesiastical businesses were an important means of economic self-determination for black women. Severely hampered by segregation, sexual and racial discrimination, and threats to their personal security, black women could not travel as freely as their white counterparts in American spiritualism, who had constituted the majority of itinerant mediums in the 19th century. An effective alternative was the establishment of spiritual ministries in homes, storefronts, and other settings where ministers offers advice and counseling on matters of health, employment, relationships, and other personal concerns. So then it goes on to say, unlike many of the mainstream denominations in which The women engaged in lay ministries were only infrequently compensated for their duties. Spiritual women were free to establish profitable ventures that ensures their economic security. Because the average black female in the 1920s and 1930s, the New Orleans was likely to employ in a low wage, unskilled job. Spiritual advising offers some women the means of refining their status as professional and exercising some financial autonomy, right? So it goes on to say black spiritual women preachers were distinctive for the ways they combined religious authority and community activism. An ardent concern for social justice appears to have characterized the work of female missionaries in the black spiritual tradition. In its early days, spiritual church founders were among those actively involved in the grassroots charitable endeavors in the city of New Orleans. Mother Catherine Seals, founder of the largest spiritual churches after Leaf Anderson, established a sanctuary in her church, the Temple of the Innocent Blood for unwed mothers. So Seal was unyielding in her opposition to the practices of local abortionists and the shedding of innocent blood. Let's read that one more time. Seal was unyielding in her opposition in the practices of local abortionists and the shedding of innocent blood and providing facility for the care of women and their babies until her death in 1930. Hmm, that's quite interesting. All right. So it says Mother Kate Francis and early student Anderson led a barefoot procession of congregants through the city streets in protest during the Great Depression. Another mother, Maud Shannon, pastor of St. Anthony Helping Hand Divine Spiritual Chapel, founded her church in the heart of one of New Orleans' poorest neighborhood, distributing food, gifts, and money to destitute families. All right, so it goes on to say that an emphasis on religious self empowerment function for black women in New Orleans churches in much the same way that it did for white women in a previous movement, the 19th century American spiritualists. Visionary experiences and revelation were primary sources of authority for women in the spiritual churches. One of Leaf Anderson assumed responsibility was to identify for her students who their particular spirit mediators were, thereby reinforcing each woman's acknowledgement of her own guiding force in the spirit realm. The practice of calling upon spirits, which Anderson taught, was central to black spiritual theology. In spiritual belief, unseen beings called saints, spirit guides, and forces communicate directly with individuals through inner voices, dreams, and vision. Every person taught Anderson Every person, every person taught Anderson possessed a spirit guide and entity who might live on the earthly planet or plane or exist in the realm of the dead. Another central convention in the black spiritual tradition was belief in a divine spirit, identified with the Holy Ghost of revivalistic Christianity who spontaneously possessed believers during worship ceremonies. So the divine spirit understood by spiritualists as a composite of the third person of the Christian Trinity and other unseen beings prompt those spiritually possessed to perform healing, speak in tongues, and deliver prophetic messages. All right. So again, and if you guys want to look more into this, all you gotta do is just look up "Practices of the Spirits," Mother Leaf Anderson in the Black Spiritual Churches of New Orleans by Yvonne Patricia Chereau. Okay. Great work, great information. All right. So I want to show you guys one more book. All right, so this book here, and I strongly recommend you guys to check this book out. This book is called The Spiritual. Hmm. Okay. This book is called Yeah, the spiritual churches of New Orleans, origins, belief, and rituals of African Americans religion by Claude F. Jacob and Andrew J. Coslow. Okay, so the spiritual churches of New Orleans, origin, beliefs, rituals, and African American religion. So you guys need to check that book out. That book is related to the subject about the spiritual church movement, Mother Leafy Anderson and Catherine Seals. Okay, so that's the book of recommendation right there. Also, um, so here's another article. I probably won't really go into this article, but I'm going to show you guys this article. So here's this article right here. Do 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 do. This article is called People of Color Rising Up, Speaking Out, Oppression and Knowledge Production, proceeding for the annual African American and Latino American Adult Education Research Symposium. Okay, so the author is Phyllis Garth. All right, so right here, as you can see, proceeding for the 11th annual African American and Latino American Adult Education Research Symposium, People of Color Rising Up, Speaking Out, Oppression, Knowledge Production. Right, so this came about on April the 6th of 2002 at Malcolm X College. All right, so that's the preface. Okay, and that's the table of contents. All right. So I'm like I said, I won't go into this. I just want to show you guys this. Um, but if you guys want to look into it, you guys can. So yeah, right here. All right, so that's all I have for today. And I hope that you guys enjoyed the video. I really appreciate for those of you that's coming through watching it. Make sure you like and subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell, share the channel, and also check out all the other videos that I've done. All right, there's more videos that I've done on here, so you guys can check it out. And also I'm gonna compile a playlist of the videos that I have done, so that way it'll make it a lot easier. You guys can look through the playlist and whatnot. So I have to go through the process of doing that. But anyways, I hope you guys have a good one. Until next time, peace and power elevation. This your girl Tiffany, and I'm out.